Ready? Huh. All right, so I'm not sure. Is anyone here going to the United States for Pesach? Okay. I missed everybody. Okay. I needed a letter sent to me. Okay, we were going over the Seder. Let me just mention in brief, I'm not sure if everybody in Mayanot is Chabad. Many of you are, some of you may not be. So I just want to mention B'Kitzer, some of unusual Chabad minhagim at the Seder, meaning unusual in the sense that non-Chabad don't do it. And whether you do it or not depends on what you do. But I just want to mention them and to compare it to the mainstream or non-Chabad and the like. First, there is one minhag Chabad has, which is not that unique, but let me explain the minhag, because it's based on halachic considerations. You know, in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, when we had a Korban Pesach, we had a Paschal Lamb, there is a halacha that the Paschal Lamb had to be finished by midnight, by Chatzos. Now, according to one opinion, that's a Torah requirement. According to another opinion, that's a rabbinic requirement. But be it as it may, there is a halacha that the Korban Pesach is nachal, it is eaten only until Chatzos, midnight. Now, by the way, what midnight is not so simple. Midnight is not necessarily 12 midnight. Midnight is the midpoint between sunset and sunrise of the next day. So sometimes it may be in a long night, like in the winter. A midpoint may be 4 hours into the night, or more. I'm sorry, 6 hours. 6 hours is an equal night. In other words, an equinox night is 12 hours. So if you have a 12-hour period from sunrise to sunset to sunrise, so Chatzos is going to be 12 midnight because sunset will be 6 p.m. But if sunset is 4 and sunrise is 5, you actually have a longer night. You have a 13-hour night, so Chatzos will be 6.5 hours into the night. But whatever it is, Korban Pesach has to be eaten until Chatzos. So the big question is this. Today we don't have the Beis HaMikdash yet, although this year we can still hope. But the Afikomen that we eat at the end of the meal is a commemoration of the Korban Pesach that was eaten at the end of the meal. The Pesach was not the main course. We ate the Korban Pesach as kind of a dessert. So the machlokes is, do we have to be particular to reach the Afikomen by Chatzos? I'll make up a number. I don't have the exact time of Chatzos here, but let's imagine Chatzos at the night of the Seder is going to be, let's say, 12:30. Okay? Now, in order to finish the Afikomen by Chatzos, that means the Haggadah and the meal, the Magid and the meal have to be finished before 12:30. Then you have to eat the Afikomen, and you can't eat anything after the Afikomen. Now, particularly this year, that's a little difficult, because since we're going to start the first Seder right after Shabbos, and you're not allowed to prepare on Shabbos for the Seder, so all of the setting of the table and everything is going to be after Shabbos. So we're going to begin that Seder a little later than usual. So what about this Chatzos? In other words, the issue simply is, must the Afikomen be eaten before Chatzos? Finished before Chatzos? So the mainstream halacha is yes. You should try to finish the Afikomen before Chatzos. Although if you missed the Chatzos deadline, you do eat it the rest of the night, but the Chatchila, you have to make the Chatzos deadline. The Chabad take on it is a little unusual, although it's not unique to Chabad. Other groups have it as well. Chabad makes a chiluk between the first Seder night and the second Seder night. In Eretz Yisrael, that's not relevant. We don't have two Seders, but if you're making two Seders in Chol, and that is, on the first Seder, they are very makbid, they are very particular to fulfill the requirement of Chatzos for the Afikomen. which means, therefore, that they kind of, I don't know if rushing is the right word, but they don't spend a lot of commentary on the Magid the first night because they have to reach the Chatzos deadline. The second night, however, they are less makbid. Makbid means particular on that requirement. So as a result, at least the traditional Chabad Seder, the second night, has many more commentaries, many more questions, discussions, because the fact that they miss Chatzos is not of major concern to them. And the reason is because the second day of Yom Tov, the second Seder, is only a rabbinic requirement, so they feel there's a certain leniency that can yield in order to enhance the Haggadah. Now, I will say that Chabad does answer a perennial question that people always have, and that is, when you have two Seders, people always wonder, how do you divide up your material, so to speak, between Seder 1 and Seder 2, because you're going over the same story. And if you gave all of your beautiful insights the first night, what is left for the second night? But Chabad's answer is very simple. Most of your beautiful insights you leave for the second night, meaning to say, the first night, you kind of have to get through the Haggadah, which is long anyway, in order to meet the Chatzos deadline, and this year we'll have a little more pressure on that. The second night, you're devoted to Torah and the like. So that's an interesting chiluk. Again, it's based on the fact that the second Seder in Chutz La'aretz is Midrabanan. So that's one interesting difference between Chabad and some other groups. Okay. Second is we know there's a mitzvah of drinking 4 cups of wine. And this is because when Hashem promises Moshe that he's going to redeem the Jewish people, you will recall HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses 4 terms of redemption. V'hotzeisi, I will take you out. V'itzalti, I will save you. V'go'alti, I will redeem you. V'lakachli etchem li liyam, I will take you unto me for a nation. These are called 4 Lashonos of Geula, and that is why we drink 4 cups of wine in a reclining position, like we're free. And the way it works is, the first cup, you recite the Kiddush. The second cup, you recite the Magid, the narrative story. The third cup, you bench over the third cup, and then you drink it. And the fourth cup, you recite Hallel, and you drink it. 4 kosos. Needless to say, women are equally obligated with men in the 4 kosos. Again, if drinking wine is difficult, you can be yotze with grape juice and the like. Okay, so how much wine? So I mentioned this last week, and someone actually mentioned the Chabad Minhag, but I just want to restate it, that the cup must hold at least 4 fluid ounces. That's the amount of wine or grape juice that the cup must hold. And you have to drink a majority of that, which means you'd have to drink a majority of the cup, but not the majority of the whole cup. Meaning, let's say you have a cup that holds 10 ounces. You don't have to drink 5 ounces. You need to drink a majority of the minimum amount the kos has to hold. Now, the minimum amount the kos has to hold is only 4 ounces. So you only have to drink 2.1 fluid ounces, even if the cup has 10 ounces. Okay. Now that is the halacha, and if you have difficulty drinking, you certainly fulfill the mitzvah with that. But Chabad has a minhag to drink the whole cup, not a majority of the cup, but the whole cup, because since this is about redemption, we don't want to compromise on redemption. We want the redemption to be complete and full. Now that does mean, if you don't want to get drunk, your cup should not be a big cup. Meaning, according to Chabad, if you had a 10-ounce cup filled with wine, you'd have to drink the whole 10 ounces. So as a result, I would recommend that if you follow the Chabad Shita of drinking the whole cup, you should go with a minimal cup of 4 ounces. That might be a lot. Now, there are low alcoholic wine, and as I indicated, grape juice might be acceptable as well. Okay. A third interesting minhag is unique to this year. I think I mentioned last week, I don't remember for sure, that this year, because the first Seder is right after Shabbos, and whenever you leave Shabbos, you have to make Havdalah. And because it's Yom Tov, you have to make Kiddush. There is a necessity to combine your Kiddush and your Havdalah. Okay? And there's a special mnemonic. There's actually an abbreviation for the order of how you combine the Kiddush and the Havdalah. And the abbreviation are the letters Yak Nahaz. That's Yud, Kuf, Nun, Hey, Zayin. It's a nonsense word. It doesn't mean anything, but you pronounce it Yak Nahaz. So what does Yak Nahaz stand for? So let's take every letter. It's literally telling you the order. Yayin. You first make the bracha on the wine, which is true for all kiddushes. The next one is kiddush. You then say the kiddush for Yom Tov, which ends with Mekadesh Yisrael. He sanctifies Israel, v'hazmanim, and the holidays. That's Yak. So now we're going to get into the Havdalah. The Nun is Ner. Because you're leaving Shabbos, you got to make a bracha over the fire. Baruch Hashem Gimachem Borei Morei Ha'esh. So it's Yayin, Kiddush, Ner. Then you make the bracha of Havdalah, Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol, that separates between the holy and the profane. And the same way you do it Motzei Shabbos, but one chiluk, instead of ending Baruch Atah Hashem, Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol, blessed is God who separates between holy and profane. Since you're moving from Shabbos to Yom Tov, which is also holy, you say Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Kodesh. Different types of holiness, separates between holiness and holiness. And the last one is Zayin, Zaman, the special blessing for festive occasions, which is Shechachiyanu. Okay, so you got the sequence. Yayin, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zaman, Shechiyanu. This is the ritual when you combine Kiddush and Havdalah when you go from Shabbos to Yom Tov. Now, 2 points here. Number one, you will notice that we don't have besamim. There is no bracha of spices for this Havdalah. And the reason is you don't need spices. I need spices when I leave Shabbos into the weekday, because on Shabbos I have an extra soul, and I feel faint when that soul is taken from me, so I need to be revived. But when I'm going into a Yom Tov, Pesach especially, I get all that elevation, so I don't need to be something. Okay. But, all right, so far this has nothing to do with Chabad. I mean, this is what everybody does, right? This is the minhag of Yak Nahaz. But Chabad addresses the following problem. When you make the bracha Borei Morei Ha'esh, right, you thank God for the gift of fire. And why do we do it when we leave Shabbos? Because actually, nothing to do with Shabbos, actually. It's because Hashem gave Adam HaRishon the gift of fire after Shabbos. So it's thanking God for fire. Now, the issue is this. Everyone knows a Havdalah candle is kind of different than a Shabbos candle, or a Hanukkah candle for that matter. A Havdalah candle has to look like a torch, meaning you have to have multiple wicks that are intertwined. If you simply have a single wick candle, that is normally not kosher for Havdalah, because Havdalah has to be avuka. Avuka is the Mishnaic term for a torch. So here is the problem you're going to have the first Seder night. Before the first Seder, after Shabbos is over, Shabbos has to be over, so the woman says, even before the formal Havdalah, Baruch HaMavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol, and then she lights, or Kodesh L'Kodesh rather, and then she lights the Yom Tov candles. Okay, but now when we start the Seder and we recite the Kiddush and the Ner and the Havdalah, can you make the bracha Borei Morei Ha'esh on the Yom Tov candles? There would seemingly be a problem with making Borei Morei Ha'esh on the Yom Tov candles because those are single wick candles. They are not multi-wick. So what do you make the bracha Borei Morei Ha'esh on? So many people have many different solutions. Some people, actually, in addition to the Yom Tov candles, they will light a Havdalah candle and keep it in its holder. Of course, you're not allowed to extinguish it on Yom Tov, which means they're going to lose their Havdalah candle, meaning they just have to let it burn. Meaning they will have, next to the Yom Tov candle, they will light a Havdalah candle. That's what some people do. Other people will take, because on Yom Tov you can move candles, because you can light them. They will take the two candles out of the lighter, out of the candelabra, and hold the wicks together. So the wicks touch. So that makes a temporary torch. And people can then, I don't know I guess you have to give it to somebody else to hold, because the person who's holding it can't make the bracha necessarily, but the other people hold their hands out and make the bracha. And then the candles can be separated and put back into the lighter. That's solution number 2, right? So solution number 1 is light a Havdalah candle and keep it in a holder, and you will not be able to blow it out. Solution number 2 is take the Yom Tov candles, hold them together so the wicks touch. And solution number 3 is almost the same, and that is, according to some poskim, in order to make a torch, you don't need the wicks to touch. You only need the flames to touch. So this would be a little different. This would simply mean hold the candles close enough so that the flames are touching, even though the wicks... See, the problem is, when the wicks touch, almost inevitably you're going to get a lot of dripping of wax. Because in order for the wicks to touch, you've got to bend the candles. So the table might be messy, and there's also some halachic shilas, whether the dripping of wax is considered to be extinguishing the flame, because there'll be less wax there. So some say you don't have to bend so the wicks touch, just hold them so the flames touch. Right? So we have 3 solutions to what we will call the avuka problem. Solution number 1 is have your Havdalah candle. Solution number 2 is take the candles out of the candelabra and hold them so the wicks touch. And solution number 3 is take the candles out of the candelabrum and hold them so that the flames touch. Okay. Chabad actually makes your life easier here. And they basically say, in a yak nahaz situation, you don't need an avuka, and you simply make borei morei ha'esh on the neiros of Yom Tov, meaning you have your light, you have your Yom Tov candles. Just look at the candles and make borei morei ha'esh. You don't have to bring the candles together. They also say, another thing that's different is that you don't even look at your fingernails. You know, the normal minhag, the way we make the bracha on a regular Motzei Shabbos, is we look at our fingernails by the light of the candles. In the Yak Nahaz, Borei Morei Ha'esh, you just look at the candles directly, and you're not mistakel on the Tzipornayim. So that means, therefore, that the Borei Morei Ha'esh of Yak Nahaz, according to Chabad, is different than the regular Borei Morei in 2 ways. Number 1, you don't need an avuka, a torch. And number 2, you are not mistakel on the Tzipornayim. You don't gaze at the fingernails. Okay. So that's a unique problem this particular year. Now, again, I'm not telling you what minhag for you to follow. I'm just telling you what the Chabad minhagim are. So if you do follow Chabad minhagim, be aware of this. Okay. Now, another interesting difference. There's something called a kittel, right? Now, a kittel is a white robe that men wear at various occasions. Many men wear a kittel the day they get married. Many men wear a kittel on Yom Kippur, a sign of purity. Fewer people, but some people wear a kittel on Rosh Hashanah. And many people wear a kittel at the Pesach Seder. It's a sign of purity and the like. So one of the interesting minhagim of Chabad is they do not wear a kittel at the Seder. Now, it's not entirely clear why, but I think the basic reason is that one of the ramazim of kittel is because a kittel is put on a man when he dies. And so part of it is we want him to remember the day of death on the day of his wedding, so he shouldn't get too overconfident. Yom Kippur is a day of judgment. So it is actually associated with reminders of death. And on Pesach, we focus on redemption and not death. And therefore, we don't wear a kittel. Okay. Right, so those are some of them. I have more that I'm going to mention as I go through the Seder, but those are some of the different minhagim that Chabad has. Now, we had mentioned last week, and I think that's actually where we're up to, that after we eat the vegetable dipped in salt water, we take the middle matzah. Remember, we have 3 matzahs. And when the Seder starts, these are 3 whole matzahs. And remember that the matzah of the Seder has to be what is called... The matzah of the Seder has to be what we call... The matzah of the Seder has to be what we call matzah shmura. Matzah shmura means guarded matzah. Now, what makes matzah shmura? How is matzah shmura different than regular matzah? Because matzah shmura was harvested as well as kneaded and baked, specifically to be used for the mitzvah of the Seder. In fact, they say, as they harvest it, they actually declare, in Hebrew, usually, l'shem mitzvahs matzah. This is for the purpose of the mitzvah of matzah. Now, non-shmura matzah can still be kosher for Pesach. Not always, by the way. Some matzah is not kosher for Pesach. Some matzah was allowed to rise, so be careful. You get one thing for sure: a regular box of matzah that you buy during the year, you're not allowed to have on Pesach because it actually might be chametz. So matzah can come in 3 varieties. There is non-kosher lePesach matzah, which of course you cannot even own. There is kosher lePesach matzah that's not shmura, and that is okay to eat during Pesach, but you can't have it for the Seder.
You eat it at the Seder as long as you also eat it.
Yes, that's actually correct. You could even have it at the Seder as long as you're not doing it for the mitzvah. And then shmura matzah is what you need for the Seder. Now shmura, and that's why shmura is so expensive, because it's there's a lot of steps that are taken. Now shmura comes in 2 varieties. There is what is called hand shmura, which is totally made by hand. And then there is machine shmura, where they dump the dough into machines that cut it and knead it and bake it. Typically, you can tell it by the shape. Hand shmura is circular, and machine shmura is like our familiar square matzah. Most people prefer, most poskim prefer hand shmura, but there are those who actually say machine is better because it works faster with less margin of error. Okay, but be it as it may, assuming you have your shmura matzah, you start off with 3 matzos, and after you had the vegetable, you take the middle matzah, or whoever's conducting the Seder, takes the middle matzah, breaks it in uneven halves. The smaller half stays with him, and the larger half is hidden away to be eaten as the afikomen at the end of the meal. Now, I will say, Chabad does take away a little bit of fun. It was a very universal custom in many, many places that children would steal the afikomen from its hidden place, and they would hold it at ransom to get some prize or gift from their parents. Chabad officially, I'm sure, my guess is a lot of people unofficially do keep this custom, probably even in Chabad, but Chabad officially does not condone stealing the afikomen. I guess they say we don't want to teach our kids to steal. I'm not sure. So they do put the afikomen away, but nobody is supposed to take it. Okay. Now,
Nobody's supposed to take that.
There's nobody supposed to steal it. I mean, in other words, it remains until the end of the meal. But again, my guess is if a family wanted to have this ritual, I don't think they would excommunicate you for wanting to do it. Now, someone mentioned last week about the big piece that's going to be for the afikomen is broken into 5 pieces. I want to talk about that a little bit because I wanted to research it. According to the halacha, all you do is you divide the matzah in 2. I keep the small half is with me, and the larger half is hidden away for the afikomen. That's it. But there was a minhag that's not so old. It was started by the Rabbi Rashab, and indeed, as far as I understand, he didn't make it a minhag for his Hasidim. This was a private minhag that he did. You understand that in the Chabad world of minhagim, there are 2 types of minhagim. There are minhagim that were said to be for all Hasidim, all followers of Lubavitch, and then there were private minhagim that the Rabbeim did, that they were not necessarily telling other people to follow, but some Hasidim follow it because they saw the Rebbe's doing it, so they wanted to do it. So this is in the nature of a private minhag that was observed. This was not necessarily a minhag that was even meant to be public, but people observed it, so it became better known. And this started with the Rebbe Rashab, Rav Shalom Ber, Rav Shalom Dov Schneerson. He was the father of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was the father-in-law of the last Rebbe. This is the Frierdiker Rebbe's father. And the Rebbe Rashab, in his house, in his own Seder, before he hid the afikomen, he took the afikomen half and he broke it into 5 pieces. And then he put it away. And this 5 pieces was so important, then when one time it got broken into 6 pieces, he took one of the pieces out and put that away. He did not put that with the afikomen. The afikomen had to be broken into 5 pieces. So the Rebbe Breitowitz, his only son, I think his only child, he was young, was relatively young, and he asked his father, "Why did you do that? I had never seen that before." And the Rashab didn't want to tell him. He said, "You're too young. If you want to know everything when you're young, you're going to become old very too quickly." So he saw later during Chol HaMoed that the Rebbe Breitowitz was very unhappy that he didn't get an explanation. So the Rebbe Rashab gave him an explanation, which is a little Kabbalistic, frankly, but I'll share it with you so you'll have a sense of what the makar of the minhag is. The Seder of Pesach is actually about 2 redemptions. There is the redemption from Mitzrayim, which is historical. That was a redemption of the past. But it is also a reference to the redemption of Mashiach and the future Geula. Because the Psukim, the Nevi'im themselves say that the future Geula will be modeled after the miracles of Mitzrayim. And the idea that the Seder is both looking at the past in terms of Gulas Mitzrayim and the future in terms of Mashiach and the Beis HaMikdash, you can actually see in the Haggadah itself. Because let's take Hallel. You may notice that we recite Hallel at the Seder, but we split it in two. 2 chapters of Hallel we recite before the meal at the end of Magid, and the rest of Hallel we recite after the meal, after we open the door for Eliyahu Hanavi. And the explanation that's given is, the Hallel before the meal is part of Magid, which is talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim, but the Hallel after the meal, which introduces Eliyahu Hanavi, is talking about the future redemption. There's a shift here. You're no longer looking at the past. You're looking at the future. Now, this idea is already said by the Rishonim. This was not invented by Chabad. That the splitting of the Hallel is because the first part is Magid, connected to the Exodus, and the second part is connected to Mashiach. But what the Rashab says is, this is also symbolized, this dichotomy is symbolized not only in the splitting of the Hallel, but also in the splitting of the matzah. The matzah is split because one half is connected to Mitzrayim and the other is connected to the future redemption. And since the redemption from Mitzrayim was incomplete because we continued to suffer Golus afterwards, that is why it's the smaller half. The smaller half, the poorer half, is the Mitzrayim redemption. But the bigger half, the fuller half, is the future redemption. And that's why the Afikomen is called Safun, that which is hidden. Because the exact time of the future redemption is hidden from us. And at the end of the meal, we're ready to eat it to experience the future redemption. Right, so that's the basic idea of splitting. Okay, so now, where do you get the 5 pieces, right? That's the puzzle that still remains. So the Rebbe Rashab explains that we know that Golos, we have in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship to the world, the universe, we have chasadim. Chasadim are powers of kindness and benevolence. And we have gevuros, powers of judgment and punishment. Chasadim and gevuros. Now, according to the Arizal, there are said to be 5 powers of gevurah. You'll find the lashon of the Chamesh Gevuros, the 5 negative powers of judgment, punishment, constriction. Now, where does the Arizal get the idea of 5? Because he points out that there are 5 letters in the Aleph base that are final letters. They have 2 forms, right? What are the 5 letters? Mem has a final mem. Nun has a final nun. Tzadik or tzadik has a final tzadik. Then Pei and Chaf. That also is an acronym. Menatzpach. Now, the nature of a final letter. See, any other letter that you write, theoretically, you could continue the word. But when you have a final letter, the word cannot go any further because a final letter is the last letter. So, as a result, the Menatzpach, the Arizal says, is a remez to the 5 powers of Gevurah that are symbolized by the 5 Menatzpach letters. Menatzbach, Mem, Nun, Tzadik, Pei, Chaf. The 5 letters that have final forms. We believe when Mashiach comes and the Geula comes, even the Gavuros are going to be transformed to Chasadim. Meaning the powers of judgment are going to be sweetened. So says the Rebbe Rashab. That's why I broke the Afikomen. The Afikomen represents Geula. I broke it into 5 to incorporate the 5 Gevuras into Geula, so the Gevuros will be sweetened at the time of the Geula. He pointed out as well that the matzah that you break is the middle matzah. Now remember, there are many, many different symbolic meanings for the 3 matzos, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. But some say the 3 matzos are Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So if you go with the Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the middle matzah is the matzah of Yitzchak. Yitzchak represents Gevurah. Right? Avraham is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gevurah, Yaakov is Tiferes, beauty. That's the medium of Chesed and Gevurah. And therefore, what we're doing is the Geula will be Mematek. It will sweeten all the power of Dina. So again, obviously there's a lot more here that is difficult for us to delve into. I mean, these are obviously Kabbalistic ideas, but it just shows you that there are some very, very deep meanings behind what one might have interpreted as just randomly breaking a matzah into different pieces, but the Rebbe Rashab had an insight here. Now it's interesting that before him, as far as I know, in other words, this was not done by Maharash, it was not done by the Tzemach Tzedek, it was not done by the Alter Rebbe. Meaning this was mamash a chiddush. The Rashab was mechadesh this particular practice, and as I say, as far as I understand, although I'm not necessarily a great expert, he had never made this a hara'ah, a directive to the Hasidim in general, but people who were at his Seder and they had seen it, they had adopted it as a minhag, and Rabbi Breitowitz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, was mefarsim it also in different sichos. He had mentioned the minhag of his father, which he followed, and the Rebbe himself followed. Now, although it's interesting, I don't know if the Rebbe's father did it. That's an interesting point. Whereas I may not have done it, but the Rebbe would sometimes adopt the minhagim of his father-in-law, even if they were different than some of the minhagim of his own father, who was also a very great tzaddik. Okay, so that's something to be aware of, and the like. Now we then come to the Maggid, and the Maggid, the Chabad Maggid, is more or less the same Maggid as everybody else. It's really the Haggadah, the standard Haggadah. But I will mention one interesting thing that you might not notice unless you've been to non-Chabad and Chabad Seders, and that is they changed the order of the Manishtana. They have a different order for the 4 questions. That's right. It's very different. So if you're used to the standard order, you're going to be a little confused when they switch around the questions. The standard order, meaning the non-Chabad order, when the child asks the 4 questions, is every night of the year we can eat either chametz or matzah. Tonight we can only eat matzah, unleavened bread. Every night of the year we can eat all types of vegetables. Tonight we only eat bitter herbs. Every night of the year we don't dip our vegetables in liquids. Tonight we dip twice because we dip the vegetable in salt water, and later we're going to dip the bitter herb in charosis. So we dip twice. And the final question was, every night of the year we can eat either sitting upright or reclining, and tonight we recline. Right? Those are the famous 4 questions. By the way, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, there was another question they asked, that every year we can eat meat cooked in any way, but tonight we can only eat roasted meat because the Korban Pesach has to be roasted. We don't have that question today because we don't have the Korban Pesach. Not only that, by the way, we're not allowed to, it's very fascinating, we are not allowed to eat roasted meat at the Seder. Why? Because since the Korban Pesach had to be roasted, we don't want people to be confused that we're eating a Korban Pesach. Because you're not allowed to eat a Korban Pesach when there's no Beis Hamikdash. That creates cooking challenges. Meaning, you can eat boiled meat, but that's not always. Well, some people like it, but for some people it's not the most appetizing thing. You might be able to have various pot roasts in which food gets cooked in its own liquid. See, roasted is when it's just roasted over a flame. Pot roast is there is an accumulation of liquid. Okay, so again, you have to talk to your local rabbi as to what meat you can eat during the Seder and the like. But the Chabad, and be as it may, the Chabad order is they put the dipping question as their number 1 question. All other nights, we don't have to dip even once, and tonight we dip twice. Once is the vegetable in salt water, and the other is the moror in the charosas. So they do switch the order. My guess is because that is what the kid sees right now, meaning like this. To start off with, the whole year we can eat chametz or matzah. Tonight we only eat matzah. Well, how does she know? Maybe we're going to have chametz later, meaning he doesn't yet know we're only going to eat matzah. But the one thing he knows is that we've begun the dipping, although we haven't done the second dipping yet. Okay, so that's one thing to be aware of. Okay. Other than that, the Haggadah is more or less the same. Let me just point out that during the recitation of the Maggid, the matzah should generally be uncovered. It shouldn't be covered by a napkin or a cloth. The matzah should be uncovered during the Maggid, and that is because of a double entendre. Matzah is called lechem oni. Now, lechem oni has 2 meanings. The bread of affliction, the bread of poverty, the bread of slavery. Because matzah is very simple. It's just flour and water. But it also has another meaning. Oni is the lashon of onim. You recite. It's the bread of recitation. So matzah is the bread of poverty. And matzah is the bread of recitation. So you recite the Haggadah over matzah. And that's why the bread is uncovered, because it is the bread of recitation. However, there are going to be times in the Maggid where you cover the matzah briefly, and that will be when you lift up your cup of wine to praise Hashem. For example, the paragraph says, it's set to music, different nigunim, V'hi sheyamda, that God's promise has stood for us in all generations, that is not just one that has tried to destroy us, but in every generation there are those who rise to destroy us, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us. So you'll recall, if you follow the Haggadah, you lift up the cup of wine, kav yachol, to salute Hashem, to toast God. So the rule is, it's an automatic reaction here. Whenever you lift the wine, you cover the matzah. When you put down the cup, you uncover the matzah. And the reason is simple. The reason is the exact reason why, when we make Kiddush, the challah is supposed to be covered, and the challah is not uncovered till after Kiddush. And what is the reason? A well-known reason. we don't want to embarrass the bread because normally bread, hamotzi, is the beginning of a meal. But when we make kiddush, we're giving prominence to the wine. So the bread gets embarrassed. So we cover up the bread so the bread shouldn't see the wine getting the cover. Right? I'll talk about what that means in a moment. But that's how it works Friday night. Seder, the same thing. At any point that we're giving prominence to the wine, cover up the chal. No, not chal, but cover up the matzah. Right? Same idea. Now, this idea about the bread getting embarrassed or the matzah getting embarrassed in the case of the Seder, that's a little hard to understand. We normally don't look at bread or matzah as getting embarrassed, so to speak. Okay, you never know. Number one, all of these inanimate objects have malachim, have spiritual forces, right? So yeah, maybe the actual bread doesn't get embarrassed, but there's a malach in charge of the matzah that might feel bad. But also you have to understand that symbolically, these are sensitivity trainers, meaning by learning to kind of feel sensitive even about the bread, the hope is going to be it'll teach me to be more sensitive about another human being. Like they tell a story with the Chafetz Chaim, a cute story, that he was traveling and he was a guest in someone's home for Shabbos, and when they came back from shul, the Balat Habayis, the woman of the house, did not cover the chalus. The man was really embarrassed because you would think the Chafetz Chaim would look at him like an ignorant man. So he starts berating his wife, why don't you cover up the challah, etc. And the Chafetz Chaim says, tell me, sir, why do you have to cover up the challah? He says, so it shouldn't be embarrassed. He says, oh, so you're so concerned about not embarrassing the bread that you don't mind embarrassing your wife. It's a question of understanding the priorities. But other than that, as I say, the Magid is more or less the same, and it will end with a partial recitation of Hallel. Remember, Hallel is divided, and that's connected to the Yetzias Mitzrayim. And then we drink the second cup. Reclining, we drink the second cup. And again, Chabad's minhag is, once again, the whole cup. Right, so you've already done 2 cups of wine. Okay. Afterwards, we now have to begin all of our eating rituals. We wash our hands with the bracha, because we're going to eat bread, al netilat yadayim. And now we have, in front of the man conducting the Seder, and actually, according to some minhagim, every single person has their own Seder plate. Those are different minhagim. But there are 2.5 matzahs, right? There's matzah number 1 and matzah number 3 are whole. And matzah number 2 is the smaller half, the non-afikomen half from the achatz. And 2 brachos are going to be recited over the matzahs. Bracha number 1 is hamotzi lechem min haaretz, because matzah is called bread. And number 2 is the special bracha, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvasav v'tzivanu. God has commanded us on the special mitzvah of al achilas matzah, on the eating of the matzah. Now, what is supposed to happen is the following. Technically, the hamotzi bracha is made on the whole matzah. But the al achilas matzah bracha is made on the broken matzah, because matzah is called the bread of poverty. So technically, you need to eat a piece of matzah from the top matzah and a piece of matzah from the middle matzah. And you do it reclining, because it's a freedom symbol of the fact that we left Mitzrayim in a hurry. And technically, it should be a kazayas, an olive size, from each matzah. Now, there are many, many different opinions how much is a kazayas, but okay. Some say it's a lot of matzah. Some say it's as much as a third of a hand shmura matzah, which means 2 kazasim would be 2/3 of a shmura matzah. And if you don't have your own Seder plate anyways, there's no way you could get the kazayas from each of those matzahs, etc. But okay. But you should eat at least a little bit. In other words, you need to eat a kazayas, but you should eat at least a small piece from the top matzah and the middle matzah. Okay. So that's the mitzvah of matzah. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa. Now we come to the mitzvah of maror, eating maror. Now maror, bitter herb. One thing you need to know, I'm sure you know this, but just to be sure, even though the most popular maror that many people use is horseradish, you cannot use charein, or Yiddish horseradish, in a jar. The typical charein in a jar, even if it's kosher for Pesach, it says O-U-P, it's kosher for Pesach. You cannot use it for maror. The reason is because this is maror that was cooked or pickled. And the only maror that can be used at the Seder is maror that is fresh and uncooked. Okay, this is a mistake that a lot of people who are not knowledgeable of halacha actually make, and they figure they can use. First of all, red horseradish you couldn't use anyway because it has beets in it. Beets is not a type of maror. But even the white horseradish that only has horseradish in it, it's pickled in vinegar and cooked. So if you're going to use horseradish, you have to use horseradish root, which can either be pieces, which is very hard to eat, or ground up. Or many people use, you're allowed to use, and some say this is the best maror, a type of lettuce with a bit of a bitter taste, and that's called romaine lettuce, which is very easy to eat. But the big problem with romaine lettuce is it does require very careful pre-Pesach checking for insects, because these types of leafy vegetables often have bugs. So you got to check it under the light, you got to rinse it, you got to agitate it, and the like. And that all has to be done before Yom Tov. If you don't do it on Yom Tov per se. Now, unlike matzah, which is eaten when you recline, maror is eaten when you sit up. You don't recline. Answer why? Very simple. You recline when you're celebrating freedom and liberation. Maror is remembering slavery. When you remember slavery, you don't recline, because you're not a free person in that way. Okay, so we had maror, we had matzah, we had maror, and then the third thing that we eat before the main meal is we have korech. Korech is the first sandwich. So the history books are very wrong when they say the sandwich was invented by the Earl of Sandwich, because we actually have the Hillel sandwich, which is much, much earlier. And Hillel had an opinion that in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, you didn't just eat the korban Pesach, the matzah, and the maror separately, but you made them into a sandwich. And we want to follow Hillel's practice to remember the way he did it in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, we don't have the korban Pesach, so that ingredient is missing. But we take the maror, we dip it in a little charosis, and we combine it with matzah. Now, I want to point out that Hillel's matzah was actually soft matzah. Did you ever see soft matzah? Sfardim still make soft matzah. It looks like a lafa, but it's not chametz. So the Hillel sandwich was really a shawarma. You had lamb, the korban pesach is lamb, soft lafa, and you had the lettuce or maror in it. The Ashkenazi version of hard matzah, it's a very unwieldy sandwich. It's a matzah sandwich. And by the way, I just want to warn people too that although it's true that both when you ate the maror separately and when you ate it with the korech, you have to have charosis. But don't spoon it on. I see people like they'll take a tiny bit of horseradish and they'll take spoonfuls of charosis. The charosis has to be a small little part. fact, some just dip it in the charosis. They don't even have any charosis there. You have to be able to taste the maror. That's the whole point. If you don't taste the maror, you're vadai not yotzei the mitzvah. So you can have spoonfuls of charosis during the meal if you want, but in the maror and in the korach, the charosis should be very little. By the way, Chabad has, because of its minhagim, has a different recipe for charosis too. Many people put in their charosis cinnamon and ginger. It's a very common ingredient. Chabad does not use cinnamon and ginger during Pesach because these are processed spices and they're afraid of chametz and the like. So as a result, they only use the fruits and wine. They don't use cinnamon ginger. They just have to use that. So we now come to the meal, finally.
Can you, if you didn't have ground ginger and cinnamon, could you, like if you had like whole dried spices, could you grind that, or would we still be concerned with chametz?
Yeah, and the minhag is not to have it at all. Again, it's not clear why. For example, I don't know if it's Chabad's minhag, but many Hasidim don't have garlic on Pesach. Does anyone know if Chabad's minhag? They do have it, don't have it?
They don't have it.
Yeah, now, what's the reason for that? There's really no reason whatsoever. But the reason was that there were places in Europe where when they would dry garlic, they would use flour. Now, even though that's not even done today, but these became customs. So with ginger and cinnamon, you have similar problems to that. Okay.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
How can you eat, like, does it... or is there a problem with gebrachs when eating the sandwich?
Yeah, so that's a very good problem. That's a very good, big issue, right? Hasidim have particularly Chabad, in fact it came from Chabad, but it spread to many, many Hasidic groups, have this minhag that even though it's already matzah, it's already baked, you have a problem of the matzah coming in contact with liquid, whether it's water, chicken soup. That's why if you're Chabad, you can't have knedlach, matzah balls, except on the last day of Pesach. Achron Shel Pesach, there's such a leniency, but you cannot have knedlach during the Seder or even during Chol Hamoed, because the Alter Rebbe was choshesh that maybe some of the matzah may not be completely baked, and if it's not completely baked, so theoretically it could still become chametz. It's a chashash. It's just an extra chumrah of Pesach. This is called gebrachs, or in Hebrew it's called sheruya. Sheruya means soaked. So the question becomes, well, if matzah cannot come in contact with liquid, even water, then how could you put the charosis, on the matzah? Isn't there a problem with gebrachs? So the answer would be this. The answer would be that you have to be careful that your charosis is not too much of a liquidy consistency. It should be more of a solid mass than liquidy charosis. If it's liquidy, it may be a problem.
What about apples and wine? How do you make it not liquidy?
You thicken it. You thicken it so it's more solid than. Every fruit has water in it. But you try to make it a more solid consistency. Meaning, if it's not a pourable consistency, it would not be within the gezerah of sheruya. But that's a very good point.
Would you put walnuts in your charoset?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, there's a thing about not having nuts. On Pesach, you're allowed to have nuts. Okay. All righty. Now, in terms of the meal, there is a minhag which is not miyuchet to Chabad. Everybody, at least all Ashkenazim, have this minhag, and that is they eat a hard-boiled egg at the beginning of the Seder. And Chabad actually takes it, at least one of the eggs, it actually takes it from the Seder plate itself. Because an egg, other people don't touch the Seder plate, they just have hard-boiled eggs. But the connection of the hard-boiled egg is the idea, interesting idea, that an egg is the food that you give a mourner after Levaya. Because an egg is oval, and it represents the wheel of life, that even though there are times that are very difficult, but Hashem brings good times after bad times. So don't be miyayish. Don't give up hope. And interestingly enough, at the Seder itself, we have a certain sadness that we don't have the Korban Pesach. It's like you're making a chasana and the kal is not there. The main character is not there. So there's a certain sadness. So we have the egg to comfort us. Also, it's been pointed out that the first night of Pesach, or the first day of Pesach, is always the same day of the week as Tisha B'Av in the summer. So if this year Pesach is Saturday night, Sunday, the 9th of Av is going to be Saturday night, Sunday. And therefore, we actually think about the 9th of Av on the first night of Pesach, and that's why we have the hard-boiled egg. There's another reason that's given, and in Hasidic Sforim, and that is the idea that a bird, unlike a mammal, is born in 2 stages. A mammal, whether it's a human, a horse, a goat, a dog, or a cat, is born live. Right, a baby is born. A bird has 2 stages. The egg is laid, and then the egg is hatched, right? The little bird comes out of the eggshell. So too, the Jewish people are compared to a bird because we are born in 2 stages. Yetzias Mitzrayim was only stage 1. Our final birth as a nation did not occur until we received the Torah. And therefore we have to remember, don't think Pesach is the end all. The tachlis of Pesach is ultimately going to be Matan Torah. And that's what the bird reminds you of. Don't confuse the laying of the egg with the hatching of the egg, right? Other than that, you eat your Yom Tov meal. Let me just remind you that, number one, you shouldn't overstuff yourself, and you might be stuffed already with the matzah and the maror. Shmur matzah especially is very heavy on the stomach. But you shouldn't overstuff yourself because you're supposed to still eat the afikomen when you're still somewhat, I wouldn't say hungry, but at least desirous of food. It doesn't disgust you, meaning you could still eat it with some geschmack, appetite. And let me also remind you that at least the first night of the Seder, even Chabad insists that you try to eat the afikomen before midnight, which means you have to shorten the meal. And again, let me just emphasize the following idea. You might think to yourself, well, wait a second. Let's assume it's 12:25 and we just got the chicken soup. So maybe, okay, so I'll eat the afikomen now and then continue eating my meal. Why can't I do that? Why can't I eat the afikomen in the middle of the meal and then I'll continue? There's a problem here. There is another halacha. You are not allowed to eat any food or drink anything except water, or maybe seltzer, after the afikomen. Meaning, the afikomen is not the final thing because you still have the 3rd and 4th cup of wine. But other than the 3rd and 4th cup of wine, you eat nothing after the afikomen. Which means the following. So if it's 12:25, and I'm in the middle of my chicken soup, so if I want to fulfill the halacha of eating the afikomen before midnight, I got to eat my afikomen, and I lose the rest of the meal. That's exactly it. I can't have my cake and eat it too. I can't eat my afikomen and then continue to eat my meal, because once I eat the afikomen, I'm not allowed to eat. You see? So that's going to be a choice that every person is going to make. I mean, okay, some people will say, well, I'm not going to, Sudas Yom Tov, I'm not going to give up. Okay, but according to halacha, actually, at least for the first night, the chatzos deadline is more important than having a big meal in honor of the Yom Tov. Okay. All right. So we had our meal. We eat the afikomen. We recite benching. And then we drink the 3rd cup of wine because we recited benching of the 3rd cup of wine. And then we open the door. Now we're talking about the last stage of the Seder. And as I said earlier, this is no longer about Mitzrayim. This is about the future redemption. And that's why we opened the door for Eliyahu Hanavi, who is going to announce the coming of Mashiach. And then we say, we fill up a fourth cup, and we say Hallel, the rest of Hallel, the larger part of Hallel. And you're not allowed to talk, but this is a very beautiful part. Many people sing it. Many people have nigunim to this part of Hallel. After Hallel, you drink the fourth cup, wine, and then we say the after bracha for all of the wine. Now, technically, you don't need an after bracha for cup 1 and cup 2 because they are before benching. They're covered by benching. So the after bracha on the wine is for cup 3 and cup 4, which you drank after benching. Now, once you've drunk the fourth cup and you've said the after blessing, the Seder is actually over. There are a number of songs that people are very beloved songs, but if you're knocked out or you can't stay up or whatever, you don't feel well, you can leave at this point. You're not obligated for the songs like Chad Gadya, which have very deep meanings, Chad Gadya, but technically they are already after the Seder, and some people, even after Chad Gadya, they will say Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, about the love that God has for the Jewish people. And indeed, there is a mitzvah that one should continue to talk about the Exodus until you literally cannot stand up anymore. Now, the final stage that we say after before the songs, but after the fourth cup, is called Nirtza. Nirtza is we pray that God should accept our service. And there's a paragraph, Chasal Seder Pesach Kihil Chasal. The Seder of Pesach is completed according to its halachas. So here Chabad has a very interesting minhag. They do not say Chasal Seder Pesach Kihil Chasal. They do not say the Seder of Pesach is completed. They literally do not say that line. And the reason is because the spiritual kochos, the spiritual powers that Hashem releases into the world because of the Seder of Pesach never go away. They're never finished. They remain forever and ever to elevate us and bring us to new places. So in effect, the Seder never ends. And that's why they don't say the Seder is over. Okay, so that's, again, something that's a little unusual. Most Haggadahs will have that particular paragraph. Okay, I guess this is it for now. Be'ezras Hashem. Even this year, we might be zocheh to have our Seder not only in Yerushalayim, you're in Yerushalayim, but with the Beis HaMikdash and a Korban Pesach and everything else. But if Chas v'Shalom we're not zocheh this year, then at least next year we should be zocheh to have the Korban Pesach. So anyway, wish you a Chag Kosher Sameach, a wonderful, inspiring Yom Tov, maybe a Yom Tov of Geula v'Yeshua for you and for all of Klal Yisrael.
Amen.